Okay, so we're talking about the big club as it relates to the West. Okay, now, who is in this big club? Let's get into this. So who's in it? And again, let's just talk generally here. We're not going to get into the weeds. Who's in the club? The politicians, the bankers, the asset managers, and those who enforce the law, also known as the military, the army, the police, you name it. They are the individuals who are in the big club in the West. Now, I'm sure you know a lot of their names. I'm sure we know a whole bunch of politicians. We know some bankers, some asset managers. Perhaps we know some of the military, army folk. We're not looking to get into here today. What are they called? What's their name? Name them. You're going to understand why I don't give a shit about any of that. People get very fucking bogged down. Who are they? Give me their names. Who gives a shit who they are? They're in the club. That's all you need to know. Whether we know their name or not, what difference does that make? What are you going to be able to do? You gonna go to their house? Are you going to bring them to court? These people make the law. And not only do they make the law, they enforce the law. So if they make the law and they enforce the law, what the fuck are you going to do if you know their name? So we don't really need to worry about who they are in terms of their names. We are going to know some of them. Some of them are politicians that we are familiar with. We may be familiar with some of the lawmakers in government and these other asset managers, bankers, etc. All right. All you need to know for the purpose of this show is that they are in the club and you aren't. Okay, so that's who's in the big club in the West. Now, how do you get into the big club is the next question. How does one get into this big club? Now, once I explain this, it'll make sense as to why you are not in the club, and neither am I. So, how do you get into the club? Well, first things first. You need to be smart. And I know a whole bunch of you aren't going to like this. But you do not get average IQ people in the club. Now, I know a whole bunch of people like to say, oh, they're pedos, and oh, they're stupid, and they don't know what they're doing. They're sending the country down the toilet. That doesn't mean they are stupid. These people who are in the club are smart, and you need to accept that. Let's look at this from a scale of 1 to 10. Let's say 5 is average for IQ. So average is 5. If you're 5, a 6, or a 7, you're not getting into the club. You're not smart enough. And if you're below 5, fuck me. Just forget about it. You need to be smart. IQ is going to correlate strongly with competency in some way. Now, I understand there are high IQ people that oftentimes do stupid things. Everyone does stupid things. Every now and again, we will exhibit silly behavior. We will make mistakes. That's fine. That doesn't mean you're stupid, though. And as far as I can tell, any politician, banker, asset manager, or fucking enforcer is no dipshit. They are probably hovering around at least 8 out of 10 on the scale of IQ. Probably above. But at least an 8. So to even be considered for the club, folks, you cannot be average, and also you can't be hovering around average. You need to be smart. Because when you're smart, you are competent. You bring a certain degree of competency to the table. And the big club in the West does not want a bunch of people who lack competency. That is going to hinder their operation. That's going to make their operation sloppy. It's going to leave gaps in the operation. And if you've got a whole bunch of retards in your club, the club isn't going to be highly functional. It's going to lose money and it's going to fucking implode. So, call a spade, folks. You need to be smart to be in here. And I hear so many people try to convince me that politicians and these people are idiots. They are not idiots. You may not like their actions and behavior. Their actions and behavior and decisions may not overlap with yours. You may not be extracting the same degree of benefit out of their decisions and behavior as they do. That doesn't mean they're idiots. They have an agenda. And folks, to carry out an agenda in the big club, you need to be smart. You need to know how to play your role. You don't have a retard in the club, because a retard in the club puts everyone else at risk. And you can't be having that. There is a fuck ton at stake when you're in the big club. And when I say a fuck ton, what do I mean? I mean resources. There's a fuck ton of resources at stake when you're in the big club. Money? Yes, absolutely. Assets? Yes, absolutely. But ultimately, why do you want money? Why do you want all of these assets? You want them because you want more status, more power, more influence in the world. That's the end game. Influence and power. But in order to have influence and power, you need money. And you need to own a fuck ton of assets. You need to have your little tentacles all over the place so that you can control what's happening in various companies and be able to, make little shifts in the market, etc. You know the way you see the markets acting all funny? Not doing what they're supposed to be doing? Well, what happens when you've got a bunch of big players in the club stretching their little tentacles all over the place? They're able to manipulate markets. And so markets start to buck the trend. Things that should be happening or that have happened in the past are not happening now. When you hold a shit ton of money or assets like gold, crypto, property, when you have a fuck ton of shares in different companies, when you're on the boards of all of these companies, you have a lot of what? You have a lot of say. And what's that code for? You have a lot of influence and power in the world. Okay, so in order to get into the club, you can't be a retard. Because if the big club in the West were to start allowing retards into their structure, that would start to put other people's money and assets at risk. And nobody in the big club is going to want that at all. So you need to have competent people in there. You need to have smart people in there. They can't be idiots. You can't have liabilities in there. So that's the first thing. There is literally an incentive for everyone in the big club to have similarly competent people around them. Because if the degree of competency drops, because you're dealing with more average IQ humans, well then there starts to be holes in the ship. Holes in the ship start to appear. And if there are holes in the ship might sink. And if the ship sinks, then all the other people in the big club's going to go down with the fucking ship. Or they're going to be stranded out in the middle of the ocean. Can't have that. Okay, so you need to be smart. That's the first thing. Get this fucking bogus notion out of your head that politicians, bankers, asset managers, and people who enforce the laws are stupid or average or not that intelligent. They are smart. Okay, so the first thing you need to be is smart. So if you're like me, I would say I'm probably, in terms of intelligence, IQ, if 5 is average, I'm probably hovering between 6 and 7. That's where I am. I'm in that range, between 6 and 7. I don't qualify. The Bandito, he doesn't have enough horsepower in his brain. And because I don't have enough horsepower, I'm not bringing enough competency to the table. I need to be able to do stuff that's going to be of benefit to the club. And I need to be able to function within that club so that other people's noses don't get fucking whacked out of joint. So I ain't going to qualify. And most people, in case you didn't realize, most people on planet Earth, where do you think they hover around in terms of their IQ? That's right, average. Most people hover around average, either a bit above average or a bit below average. The vast majority of the population hovers around 5 out of 10. So that already eliminates over 80% of people on the planet. Already. Okay, so you need to be smart for obvious reasons. Who else gets into the club, folks? Well, you see, if you're smart and you're high IQ and you're competent, you're probably going to have something of value to offer to the club. So if you've proved your IQ, if you've proved your smarts, you've proved your competency, and you're actually bringing something of legitimate value to the club that the club and its members can benefit from, how else do you get in? Okay, so the first thing you need to do to get into the club is you need to be in debt to the club. So make no mistake, folks, within the big club in the West, and we're going to come on to this a little bit later, within this club, everyone is not equal. There is, like everything, folks, there is a hierarchy within the big club. So some people sit towards the bottom of the hierarchy, some people are in the middle, some people are at the top. And the people who are at the top of the hierarchy in the big club, they are going to want to make sure that you, in order for you, Mr. Smarty Pants, who's bringing something of value to the club and is bringing with that all your competency, you don't want to be given free rein within the club. No, can't be having that. Because the people at the top of the hierarchy in the club need to make sure that they stay at the top of the hierarchy. They don't want to be displaced because they enjoy life up there at the top of the hierarchy, in case you didn't realize. So they need to make sure that the big club remains functional, but that they stay at the top of the hierarchy themselves. They don't want to sacrifice their own position of influence, power, and status. So they can't be giving anyone who comes into the club a free rein. So the second way in which you get into the club is you need to be in debt to the club. In other words, the club and the people who sit at the top of the club's hierarchy, they need to have given you a handout and you need to accept their handout. You understand what I'm saying? So let's say you're bringing something of value to the club. Well, what the people at the top of the club's hierarchy are going to want to do is they're going to want to make sure that you stay in a comparative position of weakness relative to them. So they need to make sure that they have leverage over you. And one way to have leverage over you is to have you in debt. So let's say you're bringing, all this value and smarts and competency, but you need a bit of help to get your business up and running. This really innovative technological business that you're going to bring to the table. But you need a little bit of assistance. You don't have enough capital yourself. Well, in come the members of the club. Because the members of the club are always scouting, looking for new people to recruit to the club. Because people die and things move around in the club. So there will be scouts in the big club, and the scouts will be looking out to try and find the up-and-coming emerging talent. To have fucking talent, folks, you need to be smart. That's why point one is important. So the scouts in the big club will be scouring the landscape, trying to recruit, snatch, bag, pick up all of the up-and-coming talent. How do they do this? Very simple. They give them an offer they can't refuse. So they look at some young person, some young person who's clearly smart, who clearly has a lot of brains, good ideas, good potential. And so the scouts of the big club come in and they say, it looks like you've got potential. we are happy to give you a loan. We're going to give you money in order to get your idea up and running. And of course, because this smart, competent person, what's the only thing that they're lacking at the moment? They are lacking the capital to get their operation up and going, truly. So what happens? This smart, competent young person normally takes the handout. Folks, what do we always talk about on the show here? There's no such thing as a free lunch. Ever. Never do you get a free lunch in this life. Someone always is doing something for you for a reason. I ain't bumped into very many Mother Teresas in my life. Everyone has an agenda and everyone is scheming. It doesn't make them bad people. We're going to talk about that later as well. But the scouts of the club come and give these young, up-and-coming, talented, smart people with great ideas offers that they can't refuse. And these young people, what do? They take the handout. But by taking the handout, what they don't realize is they are now in debt to the members at the top of the hierarchy of the club. And at any moment, if they don't play ball within the club, what do you think's going to happen? What do you think's going to happen their funding? What do you think's going to happen their flow of money? It gets cut and they're fucked. And remember, the people who are in this big club, they not only make the laws, but they enforce the laws. So if someone gets into the club and takes their handout and they are in debt to those towards the top of the hierarchy of the club, and they decide that they don't want to play by the rules anymore, do you think the club members are going to settle for that? Are they going to have their operation destroyed because some rogue individual wants to now, not play ball? No. And because these people are in debt, they have obligations to pay back what it is that they owe. If they don't pay it back, they're fucked. The law's going to fuck them, and they ain't going to be getting any more money. So, that's a second way to get into the club. You need to be in debt. You need to be happy with the fact that you are going to be in debt and you are going to be someone else's bitch. You're going to have a fucking dog collar around your neck and you're going to get walked by your paymasters, because that's now what you have. You have a paymaster. When you take a handout and you're in debt, you have a paymaster. But as long as you play by the rules of the club, you can stay in the club. And if you stay in the club, you get to be richly rewarded. There's a whole ton of benefit that you get from being a part of the club. As long as you continue to play by the rules, you get the protection of the club, and surprise, surprise, you gain access to opportunities that average Joe doesn't get access to. And you also get access to information that average Joe doesn't get access to. You oftentimes get access to information prior to certain events in the world happening, which just coincidentally allows you to invest your money in a certain way. Lord God, it's a miracle. You know the way these people, before these big events happen, like wars and pandemics and a financial crisis, an impending energy crisis, all those things, folks. Well, Lord, it just must be a coincidence, because there are just a select few people in the world that just seem to, they must have their magic ball. Their crystal ball. They can just look into the crystal ball and they say, They go into a meditative state and they think, yes, I'm going to place my money here. Because, the energy of the universe is telling me so. Yeah, either the energy of the universe is telling them what to do, or they are privy to information because they are inside the walls of the club. And because the people inside the club are oftentimes involved in the orchestration of such events, they are tipped off in advance. And so they can make investments of money in advance, and they can get their house in order and their ducks in a row. Surprise, surprise, they benefit. And everybody else gets hosed, because everybody else only finds out about these things long after the fact that these people in the club have already made their moves. Okay, so, again, you need to be in debt when you go into the club, because the people at the top of the hierarchy of the big club do not want people to be just roaming freely and being able to just fairly climb the club's hierarchy. No, we can't be having that. They need to have you in debt. They need to have you with a dog collar around your neck to make sure that you play ball. And if you don't play ball, not only will you get kicked out of the club, lose the protection of the club. What does it mean, folks, to lose the protection of the club? Let's just define what we mean by that. What did I say earlier? The people who are in the big club make the laws. So as long as you're in the big club, logic tells you that you will be immune from the law. Because if the people in the club make the laws and enforce the laws, then that means you are effectively beyond the law. That's one of the benefits of being in the big club. That's the protection of the big club. They protect you through the media and they protect you legally in the courts. They can just make up a new law. They can just twist the wording of a pre-existing law. They can just use their wealth to bail you out. It's great when you're in the club, in that sense. So, what happens if someone doesn't play ball when they get into the club? They start getting some brand new fancy ideas about how it is that they want to live life. Well, you get kicked out of the club. But you see, when you get kicked out of the club, what is it now? What are the circumstances in which you find yourself? Well, you're in debt, number one. So you owe them money. That's the first thing. Number two, you're not going to be getting any more money from them. So the flow of money that was coming your direction now gets cut. And number three, you no longer have the protection of the club, which means you are no longer immune from the consequences of law, which means that your ass can be dragged through court, basically. And you could find yourself in prison or in worse circumstances, if you catch my drift. What's the next step after prison, folks? You know what I'm saying? Okay, so you need to be happy with being in debt. You need to be happy that you're going to be serving a paymaster. That's very important. Okay, what's the third and final way that you can get into the club and stay in there? Well, if the members of the club have some dirt on you. So there's one way to have leverage over someone is to have them in debt. Another way to have leverage over someone is that you have dirt on them. You know what their skeletons in the closet are. And if you've got dirt on someone, that means you can blackmail them, which keeps those individuals in their place in the club. Now, we don't have to stretch our imagination here, folks, to figure out how it is that aspiring people who want to get into the big club get compromised. Do we really need to spell it out? Let me just leave it like this, because I'm going to let your imagination. I don't want to ruin everything for you folks, but let's just say you invite some politicians, some bankers, some other people, some enforcers. Let's say you invite them to a party. And let's say the location in which the party is taking place is rigged with a fuck ton of surveillance cameras. And let's say, your drink gets spiked and there's a whole bunch of young boys and girls running around. Young teenagers. Leverage. Dirt. Skeletons in your closet. In order to get into the club, folks, you either need to be in debt or those at the top of the club's hierarchy need to have some compromising material on you. Otherwise, you don't get in. Folks, we've talked about this before. Squeaky clean, morally intact, wholesome individuals are not in the club. I'm afraid that is not the type of personality that gets drawn to the club. You do realize this. And you have to be, in order to get in there, you don't just walk in because you're brilliant. Now, don't get me wrong. Intelligence is very important. Competency. You need to be bringing something of value to the table, of course. As I said earlier, there are scouts in the club that are trying to hoover up the young talent and get them essentially stuck in the club. Get them backed into a corner whereby they can't get out. So that does happen. You do need smarts, but your brilliance is not enough. Do you honestly think, folks, that the people that sit at the top of the club's hierarchy are going to allow brilliant young people to come in and start reshaping the structure of the club? That would be like shooting your bollocks off. Because if it was just free open competition, it's quite possible that those at the top, or those at the middle, or those near the top of the club's hierarchy could get out-competed. And they could get knocked off their perch. Nobody wants to get knocked off their perch. So it's very important that everyone, to some degree, at each level of the club, it's very important that everyone is either in debt or has, let's just say, there is material that compromises them in some way. And through being in debt and by being compromised through some material, through some skeleton in their closet, this helps to control people in the group, people in the club. And it is through this control by those that sit towards the top of the club's hierarchy that allows it to function in the way it does. Now, of course, as long as everybody continues to play by the rules, no one's going to have a problem. So you may have found yourself in a compromised set of circumstances, and those that sit above you in the hierarchy in the big club may have that dirt on you. But as long as you still play by the rules, you're not going to have a problem. It'll be fine. You'll have protection from the media, you'll have protection from the law. It's only if you decide that you're going to go rogue, or you're going to have a problem. Okay, so that is how you get into the club. Okay? So that's who gets into the club. Smart people get into the club, people in debt get into the club, and people who have compromised, let's just say people who are compromised in some way, get into the club. So that's who gets in. Smart, debt-ridden, compromised people. Such is life. Okay. Let's move on to part 2. Let's look at how the club works. So how does this club work? I've already explained a bit of this already. We must understand that the club is essentially taking the shape of a hierarchy. So that's how it fundamentally works. It's just think of it like a business, folks. You know, is everybody in a business equal? No. Those who are in administration, those who do the admin work, are not equal to the fucking, CEO or to the fucking whatever other executive suit schmuck in the company. Every company is broken up into a hierarchy, and people sit at different points in the hierarchy. Now, this is the important bit. I think we all understand this. This isn't revolutionary to say that the big club of the West is broken up into a hierarchy. And let me just clarify. Those who sit towards the bottom of the hierarchy have less status, less power, and less influence. As you move up any hierarchy, folks, in life, it doesn't matter whether it's a political dominance hierarchy, a business dominance hierarchy, a fucking, a sporting dominance hierarchy, it doesn't matter. If you move up a dominance hierarchy, like the one that is present in the big club, the The further you move up, two things happen. Number one, it gets more competitive the further you move up. And the second thing that happens is the further you move up, the more power, influence, and status you acquire. Okay, now, so that's the broad structure of the club. It's a dominance hierarchy. Now, this is extremely important to realize. It's really important to realize this, because what happens in a dominance hierarchy? What happens in a dominance hierarchy, folks? There is competition. Which means what? It means everyone is fucking scheming to try and overtake the person that's above them in the hierarchy. Folks, what you need to realize in this life, there is no such thing as a fucking permanent ally in this life. There's only such thing as a temporary ally. Nobody allies for the rest of eternity. That would be fucking ludicrously stupid to do that. Nobody would do that. Why would you just, regardless of what's happening, regardless of how the environmental circumstances are changing around you, why would you just weld yourself like an idiot to someone? Because of some fucking moral principles. You aren't going to get very far in life if you do that, in terms of being competitive. Folks, in the big club, it's a dominance hierarchy, which means there's a fuck ton of competition, which means all of the people within the big club are not completely unified. This is important to realize. Not everyone in the big club is singing off the exact same hymn sheet. They are all plotting and scheming to one-up one another. Folks, this is the perfect point for us to just understand the type of person. When I'm talking about the type of person, I mean the type of personality that gets drawn to this kind of a club. We need to understand this to make sense of this competitive element within a dominance hierarchy. The type of personality that gets attracted to a big club like this, it's not some wholesome, agreeable, friendly, non-competitive, nice person. Those aren't the people that get attracted to dominance hierarchies and wanting to ascend them. No. The kind of people that get attracted to big club-like dominance hierarchies are narcissistic, disagreeable, and to a certain degree, morally questionable individuals. You need to be extremely disagreeable in order to ascend a dominance hierarchy. Why is it very important that you have a lot of disagreeability in your personality? Well, it's very important because when you ascend a dominance hierarchy, what's going to happen? What did we say earlier? As you ascend the dominance hierarchy, it gets more what? It gets more competitive. Now, if you're a very agreeable sort, a delicate sort, an emotional sort, someone who, doesn't take well to criticism, someone, who will get very, emotionally affected when other people criticize them, when other people throw them onto the bus. You know what's going to happen to you if that's the type of person that you are? If you're someone like that who tries to ascend a dominance hierarchy, you will get destroyed. Utterly destroyed. Your own personality makes it virtually impossible for you to ascend that dominance hierarchy. Because to ascend a dominance hierarchy, you need to have a complete fucking distorted disregard for what other people think of you. You need to be happy to fucking take 80% of the pizza. You know the way, folks, if we get a pizza, let's say there are 4 people in the room. Let's say we've got 3 very reasonable, agreeable people, and we've got 1 disagreeable schmuck. Let's say the pizza is divided up into 12 slices. So we've got 4 people in the room, 3 of them are agreeable and nice, one of them is a disagreeable schmuck. There's 12 slices of the pizza. Now, the 3 agreeable people would say, well, everyone's going to get 3 slices of pizza. That's fair. And so the agreeable people start to divide the pizza up. Three slices for me, 3 slices for you, 3 slices for you. The disagreeable person does not want 3 slices of pizza. He wants 8 slices. He feels that the world owes him 8 slices of pizza. Because all of that disagreeability in his genetic, innate personality, which is about as fixed as your height and your eye colour, all of that disagreeability generates a fuck ton of distortion. And what's the kind of distortion that gets generated in the mind of a disagreeable person? Disagreeable people feel like they are owed more from the world than agreeable people. So all things being equal, the disagreeable schmuck he legitimately thinks that he is owed 8 slices of pizza, and that the other 4 slices should be divided up between the other 3. That's what a disagreeable person thinks like. They are ultra competitive, ultra entitled. They feel like the world owes them. They feel like they are entitled to extract more from the world than everyone else. Folks, this is a necessary personality trait to ascend a dominance hierarchy. If you are like one of our 3 agreeable people who want to divide up the pizza 3 slices each, you will get crushed the further you go up the dominance hierarchy. Because you need to be willing to go to places and do things in the competitive arena that's going to involve fucking other people over. You have to be willing to make the hard calls. And see, when you make the hard calls, you have to have a moral compass that allows you to be at peace with whatever call it is that you make. Only truly disagreeable people can be at peace with those kinds of decisions. That's why they're able to just plow their way up the dominance hierarchy and not bat an eyelid. They don't feel like they are doing anything wrong. They don't think that it's, morally incorrect, that they aren't, playing by the rules. They don't give a shit if people criticize them. They couldn't give a fuck. In fact, it probably spurs them on. So, that is one of the necessary personality traits that you need to climb a dominance hierarchy. What other type of personality traits? Emotional stability. You need to be emotionally stable, folks. If you are erratic and fucking, a bin lid, you're not going to be able to successfully outcompete other more emotionally stable, similarly disagreeable schmucks that are climbing a dominance hierarchy. You need to be able to. Why is emotional stability so important, folks? We talk about this on the show all the time. When you are highly emotionally stable, you know what you're able to do? You're able to take your emotions out of any decision. Now, for any of us who've been involved in business, we all know, folks, that you have to make hard decisions. You have to fire people, you have to lay people off, you have to cut suppliers, you have to do things that are, quote, uncomfortable for the average person. Now, the last thing you want when you're in business or when you're trying to ascend an extremely competitive dominance hierarchy is for your emotions to cloud your judgment. You're going to get outcompeted. This is why women cannot compete with men when it comes to ascending dominance hierarchies. Because women, but you know that, they're too erratic, and when it gets too tough, they start to cry, and it's just all too much, and I'm on my period today, and the hormones. They're never, ever going to outcompete stable, disagreeable males. Never. Because really emotionally stable, disagreeable males, and we're going to talk about a couple of other traits as well after this, highly stable males are able to keep their emotions in check. They're able to remove their emotions from their decision making. And they're able to look at any given decision with greater objectivity than someone whose fucking psychology is like an emotional roller coaster, up and down. We can't be having that. You can't be having that degree of emotional instability, because shit happens when you're in the competitive world of life. Shit happens. And whenever things go wrong, the last thing you need is some fucking erratic bin lid throwing the baby out with the bathwater and having the entire operation implode. You can't be having that. You need to be emotionally stable. You need to be able to strip your emotions out of any decision. Anyone who has a high degree of emotional instability, they'll ultimately be outcompeted by those who are more stable, all things being equal. Okay, so you need to be disagreeable, you need to be emotionally stable. What else do you need? Well, what did I say earlier? You need to have a low moral ceiling. So there's a particular strand of conscientiousness. Conscientiousness is another personality trait. There are different strands of conscientiousness. We've got the strand of conscientiousness that deals with being organized and orderly. And then we've got another strand of conscientiousness that deals with one's regard towards doing the morally right thing in accordance with rules and regulations. That's another strand of conscientiousness. People who are attracted to big club dominance hierarchies have a low amount of what we're going to call conscientiousness when it comes to morally abiding by the rules and regulations. They have a low amount of regard for the rules. Now, they are high in a different strand of conscientiousness. You know that strand of conscientiousness that deals with organization and order? Folks, these people aren't idiots. They are orderly and they are organized. Don't mistake me. Because conscientiousness is broken up into different strands, you could be very high conscientiousness for your order and your organizational skills, but you could be very low on a different strand of conscientiousness when it comes to how it is that you view rules and regulations and the degree to which you disregard them. People who are attracted to the ascent of dominance hierarchies have a very low moral ceiling. In other words, they have a much higher than normal disregard for the rules. This allows them to go to places that average Joe won't go to. Most people are afraid of the law. Most people are afraid that if they don't do the morally right thing, they're going to be punished by the group. You see these people? They have no problem throwing other people onto the bus, fucking them over. No problem. They have no problem bringing out their dagger and stabbing them in the back. You need to have a low moral ceiling, folks. Because in order to get to the top of these dominance hierarchies, what do you need to do? You can't just sit on someone's lap at the top of a dominance hierarchy. No, you need to remove them. You need to remove them, and then you need to take their spot. You need to get them out of there. And sometimes to do that, you need to stoop to places that the average person won't stoop to. So that's a third trait you need. And then the fourth and final trait, folks, is, it's not really a personality trait, but we've talked about it earlier. You need to be fucking intelligent. You need to have a high IQ. There's no way around it. You can't be an idiot. You have to be smart. Because the IQ is going to help you bring all of these other personality traits together and ensure that any given one of those traits, any one of those traits doesn't run amok, doesn't get out of balance. The intelligence is like the thing that draws it all together. If you are smart, you will be able to, on the fly, adjust your degree of disagreeableness, etc., in accordance with a particular circumstance. In other words, very disagreeable people can appear very agreeable because they can use their IQ to mask their disagreeability. Very smart people can use their IQ to mask the fact that they have a very low moral ceiling. Deception, in other words. They can give the illusion that they are more agreeable, that they have more of a moral ceiling, that they are X, Y, and Z, This is why IQ is important. Okay, so that is the type of person, folks, that gets attracted to the big club. You don't see nice, friendly, wholesome, high-integrity people getting in to clubs like this. It's not how it works. You have to be disagreeable as fuck. You need to be highly emotionally stable. You need to be very high on the strand of conscientiousness for organizational skills and very low on the strand of conscientiousness for basically disregard to the rules. In other words, you need to have a low moral ceiling. And then finally, you need to be fucking smart. Okay, now, once you understand the type of person that gets attracted to the big club dominance hierarchy, and once you understand how it works, that it is actually broken up into a dominance hierarchy with people sitting at different levels of influence and power within the hierarchy, once you realize this, folks, you then naturally come to the conclusion that all of these people are not singing off the same hymn sheet. They will temporarily ally with one another when interests align. Let me give you a perfect example. Everyone at the moment is talking about Israel. Israel's running the world. Netanyahu. Everyone has been sold on this notion that Israel, you're telling me, it's laughable. You're telling me that Israel and Netanyahu is telling the bankers, the asset managers, and the fucking people who enforce the laws of the world what to do. Is that what you're telling me? Fuck me, folks. Israel is playing its role at the moment within the big club. And here's the thing. What did I say? Everyone is temporarily an ally. No one is a permanent ally. That would be a competitively disadvantageous situation to put yourself in. Nobody wants to put their morals first. Nobody wants to have loyalty in the big club. Loyalty is a waste of fucking time. There is no loyalty in the big club. There are only ever temporary alliances. And then you see when the interests of two groups no longer align, you know what happens? They get pushed off to the side. They get pushed back down the hierarchy again. This is extremely important to realize. Folks, Israel is serving someone's agenda at the moment, and Israel is being allowed to do what it is doing. But you see when the time comes, mark my words, folks, you see when the time comes, Israel will sit in the corner like a scared little dog and listen to its paymaster, because Israel does not sit at the top of the big club's dominance hierarchy. Netanyahu does not sit at the top of the big club's dominance hierarchy. Oh no, he does not. Netanyahu is a politician. And politicians, in case you didn't realize, folks, politicians don't sit at the top of the big club's dominance hierarchy. They sit down below some other people, also known as bankers, asset managers, and the people that enforce the law. Those people all sit above the politicians. What the fuck can a politician do? The politician is a talking head. The politician is there to try and deceive you. Normally, politicians are there to try and distort and distract you. What did I say at the beginning? Democracy. You will get, you see in this big club in the West, you will get politicians. The function of the politician in the West is to sell you on the notion of democracy so that you are distorted about the facts of reality and distracted with this notion of voting and the political system. As long as you are distorted, what does distortion mean, folks? Distortion is nothing other than inaccuracies about the facts of reality. In other words, you've got information that isn't correct. Politicians are there to fire out a whole bunch of bogus information that isn't correct, that isn't true, and they are there to try and sell you on a narrative so that you are distracted. And primarily what they want to do is they want to take your eyes off what they are doing and what their paymasters are doing and have you fight with your common man. That's the ideal scenario. It's a fucking distraction, basically. That's what it is. So a politician does not sit. No politician, including Trump. This is why, folks, go back and watch our episodes here on Rumble. We are talking about this all the time. Politicians, they say things. And then when you watch their actions, their words and actions are never in agreement. They'll tell you what you want to hear, and then they'll go and do something else. Surprise, surprise. It has happened for as long as human fucking history has been recorded in the political arena. They will say things, get you on board, get you distracted, give you the illusion that you have input, give you the illusion that things are going to change. Here we have a new politician coming in, Reform UK, Nigel Farage, Donald Trump. They'll just bring all of these oftentimes charismatic people. You know, Trump is charismatic, Farage is charismatic. They'll get these charismatic people. Sometimes they aren't charismatic. You know, Keir Starmer point in hand here. Or, case in point, I should say. They're not always charismatic, but generally, they are used as a way to distract you. They are used as a way to deflect your irritation and your focus away from the top of the big club's dominance hierarchy. The politicians are there basically like piñatas, in a sense. They're kind of like a piñata. It's a way for the common person to vent their frustration. That's it. So when someone says to me that Israel, Netanyahu, fuck me, is telling the world what to do. And this is before we even bring in Russia, China, or anybody else. Russia and China are not part of the big club in the West. Like, are you telling me, forget about the big club for a second. Are you telling me that Netanyahu is telling fucking Xi Jinping what to do, Vladimir Putin what to do, and fucking Kim Jong-un out in North Korea there? Are you telling me that Netanyahu is... And are you also telling me that Netanyahu is telling, the asset managers in the United States what to do? Like, fuck me. No. He sits lower down in the hierarchy, and he is serving the exact purpose that he is there to serve, which is to distract you, to get you looking over here and focusing all your time, energy, and attention here. Folks, I cannot tell you the amount of young people my age in their 20s and 30s that they are so arrogant and so assured and confident that it's all Israel and Netanyahu, that it's the Jews. It's like, Jesus, Lord, you're just falling for the same trick that you've always fallen for. Just because alternative media tells you that it is Israel doesn't mean it is Israel. Remember, folks, everyone has an agenda. Everyone is selling you something. Okay, the point I'm trying to make here is when Israel has served its purpose and when Israel's objectives within the big club no longer align with some of the bigger players that sit above them in the hierarchy, Israel will be told to either get in line or leave the club. Okay? Let me repeat that. When Israel has served its purpose, because, folks, there's a war going on at the moment, and in case you didn't realize, go back to what we said at the start of the show. Do you think the people in the big club knew this war was going to happen before it happened? Or did it just spontaneously happen and everybody was caught off guard? No, they knew it was going to happen, just like the pandemic, just like everything. They've already benefited from the war. They've already benefited. It's done. Anytime, folks, there is a big event in this world, a pandemic, a war, or a financial crisis, that is code for a wealth transfer. It's a wealth transfer between the people in the big club, and it's a wealth transfer from the people who exist outside the walls of the big club. In other words, these big events that you see happening in the world, it is a way to transfer more of the world's wealth towards the people in the big club. So while you and I are busy fucking fighting among ourselves, and migration and, the people coming from the Congo and Netanyahu and the Jews. You see, while we're busy doing this, there's a big wealth transfer happening. And you know who's benefiting from the big wealth transfer? Well, it sure as fuck isn't you. Because you're too busy, your time, your energy, and your attention has been fucking diverted over here. You're focusing on this instead of looking over here. So my point here is, when Israel serves its purpose in this war, and broadly serves its purpose, it will meet a fork in the road. Because Israel and Netanyahu doesn't sit at the top of the big club in the West's dominance hierarchy. Israel and the people involved in Israel will meet a fork in the road. And you know what the fork in the road will represent? You either get in line, little bitch, little dog, you either get in line or you're out of the club. And what happens, folks, when you're out of the club? You lose the protection of the club, and you also lose your access to opportunities, information, and resources within the club. Netanyahu. Look at Netanyahu. Just look at him. He is currently teetering on the edge of being brought to court. There are people in his own country that want to bring him to court for war crimes and fuck knows what else. Do you think that the people in the big club, given everything that we've just said here, do you not think that the people that sit above Netanyahu in the dominance hierarchy, do you not think that he's either in debt to them or that they have some compromising material on him? Of course they do. If Netanyahu doesn't decide to play ball, which he mightn't, because he's a disagreeable schmuck himself. What did we say earlier about the personality traits? Netanyahu might go rogue, but let me tell you, you see, if he does go rogue, he's out of the club. And when you're out of the club, you know where Netanyahu will end up. He'll either end up in prison or he'll end up in a fucking ditch. A helicopter will crash, you know? So there's going to be a fork in the road. Everyone in the club has a fork in the road. Because when interests no longer align, when Israel's objectives no longer align, and mark my words, folks, there will come a point where Israel's objectives won't align with those that sit above them in the hierarchy. You see, when that time comes, when interests no longer align, and you know that temporary alliance that Israel had with some of the other folk higher above them in the dominance hierarchy. See, whenever that temporary alliance breaks, Israel will have, and all the people involved with Israel will have essentially two options. They either get on board with the club and their new position in the club, further down the hierarchy, or they get kicked out. And if they get kicked out, all I'm going to say is, when you get kicked out of the club, God help you. Because if you've went into the club and you've decided to go against the interests of the club, God help you, is all I'm going to say. Okay, this is really important to realize, folks, because I hear people talk online. I hear people talk and say things like, the world is over. The world is over, everything is captured, every plot of land on earth, there's nowhere to go, censorship's coming in, we're doomed, AI's coming, bloody fucking blah. There's a whole bunch of people out here, fear-mongering, scaremongering. If you have followed the show so far, you will realize, you will have noted something that's very important. And this brings us on to the third part of the show. Where is all of this headed? Where's all this going, folks? This is the big question, isn't it? Where's it all going? Well, if you've understood so far what I've said, the big club in the West is a dominance hierarchy. And everyone within this dominance hierarchy, anyone who is attracted to the big club, is a disagreeable schmuck, emotionally stable, low moral ceiling, highly organized, and highly intelligent. If you understand that that's the type of person that finds themselves in the big club, and if you also understand that people within the big club have varying degrees of, basically, let's just say, various other people within the club have them in debt and have certain compromising materials on them, when you realize all of this that we've talked about so far, what you realize is that the big club isn't as unified as you think it is. You've got a bunch of disagreeable, entitled, narcissistic schmucks that are all competing for the same things. What are they competing for? Money, assets, and the ability to wield force. Because you see, whenever you have a lot of money, when you have a lot of assets, in other words, when you own a lot of stuff, a lot of companies, and a lot of real estate, and a lot of gold, and a lot of crypto, when you own a lot of assets, as well as a lot of dollars, and you have the ability to wield force, in other words, you have the ability to impose your will through force, this grants you more status, power, and influence within the big club. The big club is fucking competitive. And the people within the big club are all not on the same page. They will knife and stab each other in the back when they have to. Absolutely, no questions asked. And this is the bit that I think a lot of people miss. People think that this is a big orchestrated, everybody's on the same page. It doesn't matter whether you're in China, Russia, France, the UK, the United States, Canada, Uruguay. Everybody has this notion that it's all just, totally unified. And that the people in the club are all just singing off the same hymn sheet. No, they are not. And this is where the hope comes in, folks. It's really good if you can realize this, because this thing is headed in a certain direction. And you know where it's going to end up? It's going to end up with the people in the big club knocking the shit out of one another. That's where this is going to end up. They're not going to be knocking the shit out of you. They don't care about you. You don't have anything. You're broke. You've no money. You've no assets. You've no ability to wield force. Your average IQ. You bring nothing to the table. Don't think that the world revolves around you. Sorry to burst your bubble. No, they're not coming for you. You don't have anything. Sure, they'll tax the arse off you. Right. They'll take a bit of your income. They'll take a bit of money from your car, from your house, whatever. Yeah, why not? You're in a complete position of weakness. There's nothing you can do. It's law, so you have to do it. You have to file your tax return, whether you like it or not. So right, they'll steal a bit of money from you, but you aren't the intended target. Don't misunderstand what's happening here. These people in the big club, which we colloquially call the elites, they aren't coming for you. No. They are fighting a battle among themselves. You see, the people in the big club in the West, not only are they at war with one another within the club, because everybody wants to ascend the hierarchy. Everybody wants to be the king. Everybody wants to be the all-powerful, all-influential Palpatine. Everybody wants to be fucking General Palpatine out of Star Wars, or fucking Governor Palpatine, whatever the fuck you call him. Everybody wants to be Lord Voldemort out of Harry Potter. Everybody wants to sit at the top of that dominance hierarchy. And everybody wants to be able to tell all the other disagreeable schmucks what to do. You aren't in this competitive arena. You're too busy down at the local park playing your football match. That's where you're competing. You're competing with the fucking, chicks in the office, in the administration office at work. That's your competition. That's who's competing with you. You're nowhere near. Neither am I. You and I, we are nowhere near the big club. We are nowhere near this arena, this competitive arena. The people in the big club in the West, they are not only knocking lumps out of one another in the club, vying for power and influence within the club, but they are also in competition with other big clubs in the world. The big Russian club and the big Chinese club and, some other club like the North Korean club. There are a whole bunch of these big clubs in the world. So there's not just, there's not just intra-specific competition. In other words, there's not just competition within the group, there's inter-specific competition between all of these groups. And here you are, thinking that it's all about you. It's not about you. You don't have anything valuable. You have a bit of money from your job. Whoop-de-doo. Right, they gobble that up in taxes. Great, okay. May as well steal a bit if you can. Why not? The real competition is taking place within the big club and between the other big clubs on planet Earth. That is where the competition is really taking place. You've got the big club in the West, you've got the big club in Russia, you've got the big club in China, you've got the big club in India, you've got the big club in North Korea, you've got the big club in Saudi Arabia, in Dubai. All of these places have their own clubs. And yes, is there cooperation at times between the clubs? Of course. What did we say? Temporary allies. Sometimes interests between clubs, between members of certain clubs will align. And if it makes sense business-wise and everybody's winning, well then a temporary alliance will be formed. No problem. However, make no mistake, the competition is within and between the big clubs of the world. Folks, this is not a done deal by any stretch of the imagination. And this is why I always laugh. See, whenever people say, you need to start the revolution. The people need to start the revolution. No, you don't. You see, people who say this, they fundamentally do not understand human nature. Let me tell you very simply what's going to happen here. In my opinion. What's going to happen, you see the big club in the West, you know what's going to happen to it? It's going to implode. If you understand human nature and you understand personalities, if you understand the type of personality that gets attracted to these big clubs, this is only headed one way. It's going to implode. You can't have, folks, you can't have this many disagreeable schmucks with a low moral ceiling in the same room together. There's only so much space in the world for that type of person before the entire thing implodes. Now, and what do I mean by implode? Folks, they are currently knocking the shit out of one another, and it will get to the point. It will get to the point where these disagreeable suits, their competitive desires, will have them do things and make decisions that ultimately will go against the interest of the club. That's what'll end up happening. The club will end up imploding because there will be people within the club who will be plotting and scheming and who will be really pissed off that there are other people sitting above them in the hierarchy of the club. And there will come a point where you will get so many of these schmucks in a room, and one of them, or a group of them, will get together and they'll try to overthrow the hierarchy of the fucking big club. There'll be a coup, you could say. And what happens whenever one group within the big club tries to overthrow those at the top? Chaos! Fucking pandemonium! And that's what I mean by implode. This is what's going to happen. If you understand human nature, you don't need to go out and do any revolution. The disagreeable schmucks are going to literally blow their own bollocks off. They will implode their own group. You don't have to do anything. But there's one thing that you do need to do. And that's what we're going to come on to now. This is the fourth and final part of this show. If we are on board with what I've said so far, if you understand that the people who get involved in these big dominance hierarchy clubs are ultimately going to knock the shit out of one another to the point where they implode the club. If you understand this, then you know what your duty is in this life. Your duty is to ensure that, you see, whenever the chaos begins, you need to make sure that you don't get caught up in the collateral damage. That is your role. That is my role.